Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be tackling disruptive innovation. We've got a whole stack of articles and research here about those sneaky technologies that really shake up entire industries.
Oh, yeah.
You know those I'm talking about.
Yeah.
The ones that kind of seem underwhelming at first,
Hmm.
maybe even a little bit, well, inferior,
Right.
but end up changing the game completely.
Yeah, it's a fascinating phenomena.
It really is.
We often think about innovation as these big, flashy advancements,
Right.
but some of the most impactful innovations emerge from seemingly humble beginnings.
Yeah, okay, so let's dive right in. What are some examples of these underdog innovations that ended up disrupting established markets?
Well, think about the motorcycle industry. Back in the day, you had those big, powerful Harley-Davidsons
Oh, yeah.
dominating the market. Then along came these smaller, cheaper motorcycles from companies like Honda and Yamaha.
Right.
Initially, they were seen as almost toys compared to the Harleys,
Yeah.
but they created a whole new category of riders and ultimately disrupted the industry.
So it's not always about being the biggest or the most powerful, right?
Not at all.
Sometimes it's about tapping into a need that those established players are overlooking.
Exactly. Another classic example is the transistor.
Oh, yeah.
When it first emerged, it seemed fragile and less powerful compared to the bulky vacuum tubes used in electronics.
Right.
But its small size and efficiency ultimately revolutionized the industry,
Yeah.
paving the way for the miniaturization of electronics that we have today.
These examples are making me think about all sorts of industries that might be ripe for disruption right now.
Oh, yeah.
But how can we spot these disruptive technologies before they take over? What are the telltale signs?
Well, one key concept is the difference between sustaining and disruptive technologies.
Okay.
So sustaining innovations improve existing products along the lines that mainstream customers already value, making them faster, better, more efficient. Disruptive innovations, on the other hand, create entirely new markets, often starting at the low end or serving needs that established companies don't even see as important.
So a sustaining innovation might be like upgrading from a clunky old desktop computer to a sleek new laptop.
Right.
While a disruptive innovation might be something like the first personal computer itself.
Exactly. The first PCs were seen as toys by many in the established computer industry.
Right.
They weren't powerful enough for the complex tasks that businesses relied on, but they opened up computing to a whole new audience, eventually becoming the dominant force we know today.
That's a great example. And it makes me wonder, why do established companies with all their resources and expertise sometimes miss out on these disruptive technologies?
Yeah, it's a good question.
You'd think they'd be the first to jump on board.
You would think so, wouldn't you? But it often boils down to what's called the innovator's dilemma.
Okay.
These companies are so good at serving their existing profitable customers that they become almost trapped by them. Their processes, their values, everything is geared towards meeting the needs of those core customers.
So even if they see the potential of a disruptive technology, they're hesitant to invest in it because it doesn't align with their current customer base.
Exactly. Take the disk drive industry, for example.
Okay.
Established companies like Controlled Data Corporation were focused on providing large, expensive drives for mainframe computers.
Right.
When the 5.25-inch drive emerged, it seemed too small and unreliable for their mainframe customers.
So they stuck with what they knew, focusing on the needs of their most profitable clients.
Right.
But I'm guessing those smaller drives found a home somewhere else.
You guessed it. Those 5.25-inch drives were perfect for the emerging market of personal computers.
Yeah.
Companies like Seagate Technology recognized this opportunity and became leaders in the new market.
This all makes me think about how important it is to understand customer needs, even in those seemingly insignificant markets.
Absolutely.
If those established disk drive companies had paid attention to the needs of those early PC users, they might have seen the potential of those smaller drives.
Absolutely. Recognizing the needs of these emerging markets, even if they seem insignificant at first, can be a game changer.
Yeah.
It's about understanding that what might seem like a niche today could become the mainstream tomorrow.
So how can companies avoid falling into this trap? How can they break free from that cycle of prioritizing existing customers and be more open to disruptive technologies?
Well, one interesting example is Quantum Corporation.
Okay.
They were a leading maker of 8-inch disk drives.
Right.
And like many others, initially missed the rise of the 5.25-inch drive. However, they did something quite clever. They created a spin-off company called Plus Development, specifically focused on that disruptive technology.
So they separated the disruptive innovation from their main business.
They did.
That makes a lot of sense. But wasn't that a risky move?
It was.
I mean, what if that spinoff had failed?
There's always a risk, but in this case, it paid off. Plus, development flourished, serving the burgeoning personal computer market. Eventually, Quantum realized the potential and essentially reabsorbed, plus becoming a leader in the new market.
Okay, so creating this separate entity, this independent space, can be a way for companies to embrace disruptive innovation without jeopardizing their core business.
Right.
It's like giving the innovation room to breathe and grow without being stifled by existing structures.
Precisely. It allows them to experiment, to be more agile, and to respond more effectively to the unique demands of that emerging market.
Right.
And it highlights a critical point. Disruptive innovations often start in small, seemingly unattractive markets.
It's a bit paradoxical, isn't it?
It is.
The areas that seem least appealing to established companies, small markets, low margins, are often the very things that can lead to the biggest disruptions.
That's right.
But didn't Apple, a tech giant, try to jumpstart a small market with the Newton PDA?
That's right. And it's a fascinating example of how even a company like Apple, known for its innovative spirit, can face challenges when dealing with disruptive technologies. They invested heavily in the Newton, hoping to accelerate the growth of the PDA market.
The Newton, I remember that. It was ahead of its time.
It was.
But it wasn't exactly a huge commercial success, was it?
No, it wasn't.
Yeah.
Despite outselling Apple's own early computers in their first years,
Wow.
the Newton was ultimately considered a failure because its impact on Apple's overall revenue was small.
So even though it was successful in its own right, it wasn't a big enough win for a company of Apple's size.
Yes.
That seems a little harsh. I mean, it was a pioneering product.
It was.
It laid the groundwork for the smartphones we use today.
You make a good point. The Newton actually followed a similar adoption curve to the Apple II.
Wow.
Which is considered a groundbreaking product. But in a company of Apple's size at that time, those numbers were simply not significant enough. It highlights a key challenge. What constitutes success can look very different depending on the size and goals of the company.
That's an interesting insight. And it brings up another question. How can companies effectively plan for these disruptive technologies when the markets are so unpredictable and can change so rapidly? Traditional market research methods might not be very helpful in these situations, right?
You're absolutely right. Traditional market research methods, which work well for sustaining innovations where the market is well-defined, often fall flat when dealing with disruptive tech. The markets are evolving so rapidly, the customer needs are still being defined, and the whole landscape can shift in the blink of an eye.
It sounds like you're trying to predict the unpredictable.
It can feel that way.
Yeah.
Take the disk drive industry again. Distrend, a reputable market research firm, had a stellar track record of forecasting for sustaining technologies. Their predictions were incredibly accurate.
They must have felt pretty confident then when they started forecasting for disruptive technologies.
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But when it came to those disruptive technologies like the 5.25-inch drives, their predictions were all over the map. They vastly overestimated some markets and underestimated others. Even the experts can get it wrong when it comes to disruptive innovation.
So if traditional market research isn't always reliable, what's the alternative? How can companies navigate this uncertainty and make informed decisions about investing in disruptive technologies?
That's where discovery-driven planning comes in. It's a more iterative approach that prioritizes learning and adapting as the market develops, instead of trying to create a detailed roadmap based on assumptions that might be completely wrong. Companies need to be constantly testing, learning, and pivoting as they gain new insights.
So it's about being flexible and responsive, rather than rigidly sticking to a plan that might be outdated before it's even implemented.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging that you can't know everything up front, so you need to be constantly gathering information, experimenting, and adjusting your course as you go. It's more like navigating uncharted waters than following a well-worn path.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about embracing uncertainty and having the agility to adapt as the market unfolds. But it also sounds like the very things that make a company successful, its existing structures, processes, and values, can become liabilities when facing disruptive change. Is that what you're saying?
That's a brilliant observation. You see, a company's capabilities, its resources, processes, and values are what allow it to excel in its current market. But those same capabilities can become disabilities when the market shifts in a disruptive way.
It's almost like a superpower that suddenly becomes a weakness.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're so good at one thing that it blinds you to other possibilities.
Precisely. A perfect example is Toyota's disruption of the auto industry.
But
They didn't do it with some radical new technology, but with process innovations like their lean manufacturing system.
right.
This focus on efficiency and quality allowed them to produce cars that were more reliable, more affordable, and ultimately more appealing to customers.
So they disrupted the industry by doing things differently, not necessarily by inventing something completely new.
Exactly. Meanwhile, General Motors, despite having vast resources and investing heavily in new technology,
Right.
struggled to adapt because their processes remained fundamentally unchanged. They were trying to win a new game with old rules.
That never works. So it's not just about having the right technology, but also about having the right processes and the right mindset to adapt to a changing market.
Hmm.
But how can companies avoid becoming too rigid? How can they make sure their strengths don't become weaknesses?
It's a constant challenge, and there's no one-size-fits-all answer. However, Cisco Systems offers a great example of successfully navigating this challenge.
Okay.
They have a remarkable track record of integrating smaller acquisitions into their existing processes while allowing larger, more established acquired companies to remain independent.
So they're strategic about which parts to absorb and which parts to let flourish on their own.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that different types of innovation require different organizational structures and approaches. You can't force a square peg into a round hole. Sometimes you need to give those disruptive innovations the space and freedom to evolve on their own terms.
I'm starting to see how all of this fits together.
Good.
It's not just about coming up with the coolest, most advanced technology.
Right.
It's about understanding the market, the customers, and having the right organizational structure and processes to bring that innovation to life. But you mentioned earlier that disruptive technologies often emerge when existing products exceed the performance levels that the market demands.
Yes.
How does that work? Why would too much performance be a bad thing?
That's a great question. It does seem counterintuitive, but think about it this way. As companies strive to outdo each other,
Right.
they constantly push the boundaries of performance, often exceeding what customers actually need or are willing to pay for. It's like a race to the top, where everyone's focused on being the fastest, the strongest, the most feature-packed, even if those extra features don't really add much value for most customers.
So it's like those smartphones with cameras that are so good, they rival professional equipment. Most people just use them to take selfies and pictures of their pets.
Right?
They don't need all that fancy technology.
Exactly. And that's where disruptive technologies can sneak in. They might not be as performant in those traditional metrics, but offer other advantages: simplicity, affordability, convenience.
So it's about being the best fit for a particular market need,
Right.
not necessarily the best in every way.
Precisely. Winmere Associates, a market research firm, has a concept called the buying hierarchy.
Oh, wait.
It describes how the basis of competition shifts as a market matures.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Uh-huh.
Tell me more about this buying hierarchy. How does it work?
Initially, when a product is new, the focus is on functionality.
Yeah.
Does it work? Does it do what it's supposed to do?
Okay.
Then the competition shifts to reliability. Can I count on it to work consistently?
Makes sense. Once everyone can deliver the basic functionality, you start looking for the most dependable option.
Right. Then, as reliability becomes a given convenience, takes center stage.
Mm.
Is it easy to use? Is it accessible? Is it hassle-free? Finally, when you have multiple products that are functional, reliable, and convenient,
Right.
price becomes the ultimate deciding factor.
So we've gone from does it work to can I trust it
Yes.
to how easy is it to how much does it cost?
Exactly.
It's like a natural progression as the market matures.
Exactly. And this is where disruptive technologies can really shine.
Okay.
They're often simpler and more affordable from the start,
Right.
so they're perfectly positioned to exploit the shift in the market's priorities.
Yeah.
What was once seen as a weakness, lower performance, simpler features, becomes their greatest strength.
Wow. This whole conversation has given me a whole new perspective on how innovation plays out in the real world.
Good.
It's not just about coming up with the coolest, most advanced technology.
Right.
It's about understanding the dynamics of the market and knowing how to position yourself for success.
Absolutely.
It's also about being aware of those seemingly insignificant innovations that could become the transistors or the 5.25-inch drives of tomorrow.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it so exciting.
Yeah.
There's always something new emerging,
Right.
something that has the potential to change the game completely.
I'm already starting to look at the world differently. Noticing those little innovations that might be flying under the radar.
That's the first step. Recognizing the potential for disruption is key.
Yeah.
And that's something we'll explore further when we continue our deep dive after a short break.
All right, I'm ready to keep diving deeper into this whole disruptive innovation thing. We've talked about how established companies can miss out on these game-changing technologies. But what about those companies that are built on disruption from the ground up?
Right.
What are their secrets to success?
That's a great question. One key factor is their ability to adapt quickly as they learn about the market.
Okay.
Remember, we're often talking about those emerging unpredictable markets,
Right.
where customer needs are still evolving.
Right. Like trying to hit a moving target.
Exactly.
So flexibility is key.
It is.
But how does that play out in the real world?
Well, think about it like this. Imagine a company launches a new product based on a disruptive technology.
Okay.
They might have a solid plan based on their initial understanding of the market. But what happens when they start getting feedback from those early adopters?
Right.
What if those customers highlight needs that they hadn't anticipated?
Well, it sounds like they need to be ready to pivot,
Yes.
to tweak their product or even their whole business model based on that feedback.
Right.
It's that whole discovery-driven planning thing we talked about earlier.
Exactly. And it's not just about being flexible with your strategy, but also with your product development.
Okay.
Disruptive technologies often start out with limited functionality,
Right.
but they can improve rapidly based on what they learn from those early customers.
So it's about finding that balance between getting a product out there quickly to start gathering feedback.
Yes.
And then iterating, refining, and enhancing it based on what you learn.
Yeah.
It's like building the plane while you're flying it.
That's a great analogy. And Apple's early days are a perfect example of this.
Oh, yeah.
Their first product, the Apple I, was very basic,
Okay.
but it got them into the market, allowing them to learn and then incorporate those learnings into the Apple II,
Right.
which became a massive success.
It's amazing to think that Apple now, this global giant, started with such humble beginnings.
It is.
It's a real testament to the power of iteration and continuous learning.
Absolutely.
But going back to those established companies for a second,
Sure.
why do they often struggle to adapt in the same way?
Well, remember how we talked about those established companies being held captive by their existing profitable customers?
Right.
Well, that can create real inertia, making it hard to embrace new ways of doing things.
It's like they're stuck in their comfort zone doing what's worked in the past, even if it's no longer the best approach. But we've also talked about how creating separate autonomous units can help. Didn't IBM use this strategy successfully?
They did. They were a dominant force in the mainframe computer market.
Right.
But recognized that the emerging PC market required a different approach.
Yeah.
They created a completely separate organization to focus on PCs, freeing it from the constraints of their mainframe business.
That's a really smart move. It's like they recognized that to compete in this new market, they needed to operate with a different mindset, almost like a startup within a larger company.
Exactly. And it allowed them to be more agile, to experiment.
Yeah.
And to make decisions that might have been impossible within the rigid structure of their mainframe business.
Right.
Unfortunately, not all companies see the wisdom in this approach.
Are there any examples of companies that try to force disruptive technologies into their existing structures? What were the consequences?
Digital Equipment Corporation, or DEC, is a classic cautionary tale.
Okay.
They were a powerhouse in the mini-computer market,
Right.
but completely missed the rise of personal computers.
They probably couldn't imagine that those little desktop computers would pose a serious threat to their mini computers.
Right. DEC actually made several attempts to enter the PC market.
But each time they approached it from within their existing organizational structure,
Oh.
they tried to make PCs fit into their mini computer world,
Great.
and it just didn't work.
What went wrong? Why couldn't they make it work?
Their PCs ended up being too expensive and complex for the average user. They were essentially trying to sell a mainframe experience in a PC package,
Oh.
which just wasn't what the market wanted.
Right.
They couldn't compete on price, and their products were just too complicated for the average PC user.
Right.
They eventually withdrew from the market multiple times.
Wow. It's almost like they were blinded by their own success. They were so good at mini computers that they couldn't see the unique demands of the PC market. It's a stark reminder that past success doesn't guarantee future success, especially when dealing with disruptive technologies.
It's a valuable lesson, and it highlights the importance of recognizing that disruptive innovations often require different approaches,
Right.
different structures, and even different values. So creating these separate organizations seems to be a recurring theme for companies that want to successfully embrace disruptive innovations.
Hmm.
But I imagine there's more to it than just setting up a new office and telling them to go disrupt things. What else is important?
You're right. It's not just about creating a separate structure, but about aligning that structure with the needs of the disruptive technology and the market it's targeting.
Okay.
It needs to be a deliberate, strategic move,
Right.
not just a knee-jerk reaction to feeling threatened.
So it's about understanding the unique challenges and opportunities of that disruptive technology.
Yes,
And creating an environment where it can thrive.
exactly.
Do you have any examples of companies that have done this really well?
Johnson & Johnson is a fantastic example.
Okay.
They've built an empire of over 160 autonomous companies,
Wow.
each with its own focus and operating structure.
160 companies. That's incredible.
It is.
Sounds almost like a venture capital firm more than a traditional corporation.
You could say that. It's a key part of their strategy for embracing disruptive innovation. When they identify a promising disruptive technology, they often acquire a small company already working in that space and give it the resources and independence it needs to flourish.
That's really smart. They're tapping into the agility and entrepreneurial spirit of startups
Right.
while providing them with the stability and resources of a larger corporation.
Yeah.
Like a win-win for everyone involved.
Exactly. And it allows them to stay ahead of the curve, constantly bringing new products and technologies to market.
So we've talked about how established companies can adapt to disruptive innovation, but let's go back to those companies that are built on disruption from the ground up.
Sure.
What are some of their other key success factors?
One crucial aspect is their understanding of the power of simplicity. Disruptive technologies often start out being simpler and more affordable than the established alternatives.
Right.
And that simplicity can be a huge advantage. Think about the first personal computer. They were much simpler than the mainframe computers of the day. But that simplicity made them accessible to a whole new audience.
It's like those early cell phones.
Right.
They could only make calls and send text messages.
Yes.
But they were small, affordable, and easy to use.
Right.
Compared to those bulky, expensive car phones, they were a revelation.
Exactly. And that simplicity allows disruptive innovators to focus on delivering the core functionality that customers truly value.
Right.
Without getting bogged down in unnecessary bells and whistles.
Yeah.
It's about solving a specific problem in a straightforward and effective way.
So it's about being laser focused on what matters most to the customer.
It is.
But isn't that hard for established companies to do? They're so used to competing on features and performance that they seem to have a hard time embracing simplicity.
You're absolutely right. It's a common trap.
Yeah.
Established companies often fall into the mindset that more is always better,
Right.
even when customers are looking for something simpler and more affordable. They might pack their products with features that most customers never even use, driving up the cost and complexity.
It's like those software programs with a million features, most of which are hidden in menus that no one ever explores. Sometimes less is definitely more.
Precisely. And for companies built on disruptive innovation,
Right.
it's about resisting that temptation to overcomplicate things and staying true to that initial value proposition of simplicity.
It's about remembering that what might seem like a weakness in the mainstream market, simplicity, lower performance, can actually be a strength in those emerging markets where customers are looking for something different,
Right.
something that solves their specific problem without all the extra baggage.
Exactly. Think about those early digital cameras.
Okay.
They couldn't match the quality of film cameras,
Right.
but they offered convenience and affordability. That made them attractive to a whole new segment of customers who weren't professional photographers, but just wanted a simple and easy way to capture memories.
Right.
Those early adopters helped to create a new market.
Which eventually overtook the film camera market.
It's a reminder that what matters most is how well a product meets the needs of its target market.
Absolutely.
Not necessarily how it stacks up against existing products in terms of traditional metrics.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another crucial aspect of success in disruptive innovation, effectively communicating the value proposition of your disruptive technology.
Okay.
It's not about trying to convince everyone that your product is the best in every way,
Right.
but about finding the right audience and speaking directly to their needs.
So instead of trying to compete head-to-head with established players on their terms,
Yes.
you need to carve out your own niche and highlight the unique benefits that your disruptive technology offers.
Exactly. It's about positioning your disruptive technology as the ideal solution for a specific problem rather than trying to be everything to everyone.
Right.
Think about how Netflix disrupted the video rental industry. They didn't try to compete with Blockbuster on their terms,
Right.
offering a wider selection of new releases.
Instead, they focused on convenience, affordability, and a wider selection of older titles.
And look what happened. Netflix completely changed how we consume entertainment.
They did.
It's another great example of how a disruptive technology can sneak in and change the game by focusing on a different set of customer needs and values.
It's a fantastic illustration of how disruptive innovation isn't always about being the biggest, the fastest, or the most feature-rich.
Right.
It's about understanding the dynamics of the market, the needs of specific customer segments, and aligning your strategy and product development accordingly.
I'm realizing that disruptive innovation is more nuanced than I initially thought.
Yeah.
It's not just about coming up with a brilliant new invention,
Right.
but also about understanding the market and adapting to its ever-changing demands.
Absolutely. And it's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
The markets you're targeting will evolve, customer needs will change, and you need to be able to adapt and refine your approach as you go.
Right.
The key is to stay flexible, to be willing to learn and adapt,
Right.
and to constantly challenge your assumptions about how things should be done.
This has given me a lot to think about.
Good.
I'm already starting to look at industries and markets with a new perspective, wondering where the next disruption might come from.
That's great.
But before I get too carried away, maybe we should take a moment to let all of this sink in.
That's a great idea. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
When we return, we'll explore how these insights can help you, our listeners, navigate the world of disruptive innovation and perhaps even become disruptors yourselves.
Okay, I've had a moment to process all these fascinating insights about disruptive innovation. We've explored how it works, why established companies sometimes struggle with it, and what those disruptive newcomers do differently. But now I'm wondering, what does all this mean for me, for our listeners? How can we apply these insights to our own lives and careers?
That's the key question, isn't it? It's one thing to understand the theory,
Right.
but it's another thing entirely to put it into practice.
Exactly. So let's get practical. What are some actionable takeaways that we can walk away with?
Well, one of the most important things, in my view, is to cultivate a mindset of continuous learning and adaptability.
Okay.
The world is changing at an incredible pace, and the only way to stay ahead of the curve is to be constantly learning, experimenting, and evolving. Remember that concept of discovery-driven planning we discussed earlier?
Right.
It's about embracing that mindset of curiosity and exploration.
So it's not just about passively absorbing information,
Yeah.
but about actively seeking out new knowledge and applying it to real-world challenges.
Absolutely. It's about being proactive,
Yep.
not reactive. Don't just wait for the disruption to hit you.
Right.
Go out and find it, or even better, create it yourself. Be that person who's always asking why and what if,
Yeah.
challenging assumptions and exploring new possibilities.
It's almost like we need to become disruptors in our own right, even if we're not starting a company or launching a new product.
Exactly. Think about it in the context of your own career. What skills will you need to thrive in the future? What industries are ripe for disruption? What are the emerging trends that you should be paying attention to?
Right?
By asking these questions, you can proactively position yourself for success in a rapidly changing world.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's about being aware of those shifts and preparing yourself for the future, even if you don't know exactly what that future holds. It's like those surfers who are always scanning the horizon,
Yeah.
looking for the next big wave.
That's a great analogy. And it highlights another important takeaway: the importance of challenging assumptions.
Okay.
We often get so caught up in the way things have always been done that we fail to question whether there might be a better way. It's like we're stuck in a rut,
Yeah.
blindly following the same path, even when it's no longer serving us.
It's like driving down the same road every day, even when there might be a faster, more scenic route just a few blocks over.
Right.
We get so used to the routine that we don't even consider other options.
Exactly. And that's where disruptive innovation comes in. It's about breaking free from those ruts, questioning the status quo, and exploring new possibilities. Think about those companies that disrupted the taxi industry with ride-sharing apps.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't invent new technology. They simply found a new way to apply existing technology to solve a problem in a more efficient and customer-friendly way.
So disruptive innovation doesn't always require a groundbreaking invention.
No, it doesn't.
It can be about finding new ways to use existing tools and technologies to create value. It's about looking at things with fresh eyes and asking, could this be done better?
Precisely. And that brings us to another key takeaway: the importance of action.
Okay.
It's not enough to just think differently. You need to act differently. Disruptive innovation requires a willingness to experiment, to take risks, and to embrace uncertainty.
It's about getting out of our comfort zones, pushing our boundaries, and not being afraid to make mistakes along the way. It's like learning to ride a bike. You're going to fall a few times,
Right.
but that's how you learn to balance and eventually ride with confidence.
Exactly. Failure is an essential part of the learning process.
Yeah.
And it's often through our mistakes that we gain the most valuable insights. Remember those companies we talked about earlier, like Quantum and IBM,
Right.
who created separate units to pursue disruptive technologies?
Right.
Well, not all of those experiments were successful, but they learned from those failures and used that knowledge to refine their strategies and ultimately achieve success.
So it's not about avoiding failure, but about embracing it as an opportunity to learn and grow. It's about having that growth mindset, as they say.
Absolutely. And that brings us to our final takeaway. Remember that disruptive innovation is not just a business concept.
Okay.
It's a way of thinking and acting that can be applied to any aspect of our lives. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a corporate executive, an artist, or a student, the principles of disruptive innovation can help you navigate change, identify opportunities, and create a more fulfilling and impactful life.
So it's about being open to new ideas, challenging assumptions, and embracing the power of experimentation, whether we're launching a new business or simply trying to improve our own lives.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that the future is not something that just happens to us. It's something we create through our actions, our choices, and our willingness to embrace change.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive into disruptive innovation. I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on how innovation works, why it matters, and how I can apply these insights to my own life.
I'm so glad to hear that. Remember, the world is full of opportunities for those who are willing to look for them. So keep your eyes open, your mind curious, and don't be afraid to disrupt the status quo.
That's great advice. And on that note, we'll bring this deep dive to a close. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you'll tune in again soon for another exploration of the fascinating world of ideas, insights, and innovations.